These are parts from a Wincharger. Now this is Wincharger, no D. They are from 20s, 30s. Up until the REA came through, they were pretty common. The most common was the 6-volt one. It was designed to run a radio and maybe a light bulb or two. But they used a relatively short propeller, which is what this governor is for. It's for the 6-volt model. Now my model is actually a 12-volt one, which is a little unusual because, like I say, 6-volt, real common, for the radio and the light bulb. And then they jumped up to the 32-volt because then they could tie them in with Delco light plants. So they were pretty common. In fact, there was a gas station a couple miles from here that for years and years ran all of his equipment off that 32-volt Wincharger. All his valve grinders and all that stuff, he was did a lot of mechanic stuff, but everything was 32-volt DC. Well, I like this 12-volt is handy. In these days when you can get an inverter that's 12-volt that kicks it to 120, they're kind of nice. And I have used this 12-volt model with this little governor, but that's a little chancy. Okay, the way these things work, the propeller is mounted this way. And these were, I think, like a 6-foot propeller on these. And I really need to run 8 or even 10 to get the maximum output on this one. The bigger 32-volt, they had a gear reduction box in them that slowed the thing down, but the 12-volt was direct drive just like the old 6-volt ones. Well, the way these work, as it runs, this thing is spinning, and when it gets going anything over about 20 miles an hour, the centrifugal force turns these down. So they actually start cutting the wind, and that's what actually slows it down. And you can hear it, when you get a gust of wind, you can hear it, it'll go boom, 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 and it slows it down as that governor kicks in. A lot of different companies use a lot of different methods, but this is a good, solid, reliable way of doing it. Though they do have what you'd call a parking brake that actually runs against this drum, so if you got a storm coming, you can flip a lever on the bottom of the tower, locks the brake and holds it. A lot of them, other companies made them that pitched the tail sideways so the blades weren't pointed into the wind. There's a lot of little tricks they used, but these were by far the most common. The Wincharger brand. They came out of Sioux City, Iowa. And they were in business up until, I think, 53, when the company got flooded out. But there's quite a following for these. And what happened was the Wincharger company was making these things, and Zenith got involved because Zenith realized, oh man, this is a boom for their radios for selling for farms. So you'll see a lot of them that have got, on the tail it says Zenith, though this was strictly a Wincharger, But there's a lot of where you could buy you would buy the package deal where you got a little tower, a 6-volt charger, and the radio and the batteries, for like 15, 20 bucks. But, they were trying to move them. But it was before REA, the rural electrification came in. So, anybody, if you could scratch together the money, you'd buy one to get that radio, and a light bulb. I still have the original tower that my grandparents on my mother's side had bought. I've got that, but that's a short it's got to be like 6 foot tall tower that's made to mount on a roof, which really isn't an advisable thing to do because when they get whipping, there's a lot of vibration, and they'll just drum on a roof. I know people who said that they had mounted them on chicken coops and the chickens quit laying, because that racket just bothered them. And I know somebody who talked about they mounted one on a stone house and it was shaking the stones loose, a constant vibration. So they're better off on a freestanding tower by themselves. But what I got to do, I got to make a new prop for this one. And like I say, I've used this little governor, but when you look, there's a whole lot of difference in controllability on that size. But I got to make up a couple of parts in there. I have the right springs, but I got to weld up the spring holes that have been ripped out of this one. Then I got to make this cross link and the 2 arms. No biggie, I can make this. And propellers I have made before. So that's not a big thing. I got a good piece of wood for doing that. Got to take this generator apart. I want to re-insulate these wires that are looking pretty ratty. So I was going to check the bearings. They use an odd dual ball bearing setup that I know when I replaced them one time I had to get them out of some foreign country. But I think these are okay. But it's the kind of thing where you really, it's going way up on a tower. You don't want to have to climb up there all the time. And they're very awkward to put up and down. One thing I do have to find is this bearing. Okay, this mechanism here, it's actually got like brushes on it. They're like bronze that run against a commutator on the tower. Slip ring it's called, that feeds the power down. Well, where this sits on the tower, they run this kind of a bearing, to do a kind of a lazy Susan action. Well, I'm going to have to check on the bearing supplies if they don't have something like that. Because this one is rather stuck. And it's got to be able to swing, with the wind. Though they got a big tail on them. But, like I say, I don't want to be up and down. And I should check. There's big graphite brushes, big square ones in there. I actually have a whole another 12-volt unit. So I'm going to go through both of them and pick the best brushes to put up there. They're interesting, but Wincharger Corporation's got quite a history. And it really brought technology to the farm, man, before REA came through. But REA put a dent in their business, of course. In fact, where I got this one was from a guy, when REA came through, he went around the farms and bought up all of the Winchargers and the towers, because he could get them really cheap. And so he had a bunch of these, piled up that he was hoarding. But he was really into the Wincharger thing, long after it ceased to be to matter. So he didn't have one yet. This was years ago. I'm sure he's dead now. He was crazy. Well, it was called Crazy Eddie. But he was in a town down south of me. And I just happened to run into him, and he had all this Wincharger stuff, so I bought this 12-volt unit from him. Then there's a little control panel with a relay. Well, a neighbor over here happened to have an old box car that had that relay in it, because it was for that 12-volt system, which is just amazing. But because a lot of times what people used to do, they'd move out here, they would live in a box car until they could get a house built. They'd buy an old wooden box car, and that was home until you could build your house. So they had mounted that Wincharger to power that box car and to power radio. So he just thought it was cool, because actually that's where I got, I think that might be, I know I got some of these controllers. I think it might have been for this one that he had been using in his house to prop up the air conditioner in the window. And I said, I saw that, and I said, well, isn't that off an old Wincharger? Yep, he said, I got other parts, so we got that relay out of him. But I got to find or make up these control arms for this and that cross piece that goes in here. But these are the right springs. So I'm not far along, but I got to patch those holes. Because they generally have 2 holes that you can set them, and it depends on the size of the propeller. But that'll be a job. But I'm running my power line. I got the tower up. But I think next thing I'm going to have to check that and get this bearing. They're a cool little setup though. But, you know, it's... and there's quite a few people who are really into these things that collect these, and the Jacobs. There's a lot of Jacobs people too. But they have a whole different sort of a governor setup, and there's 3-bladed. Wincharger just used that single blade, well, dual, you know, but made out of Douglas fir. But I have made blades before, so I gotta make one up, which is always interesting. You have to understand aerodynamics, because they're really a rotating wing. But they were really cool setup. It's funny now, you know, they make all these that have got all this fancy crap that never seem to last very long. They got polymer blades that are made to flex with the wind. And I know I had the most interesting one. The one time I had run across it was called a Windstream brand, little 12-volt Wincharger. But the funny thing about it, I ended up with it from a flea market. But when I checked into the company, they actually aren't available in this country. They are only sold in Africa, which is weird. But they did a whole different thing. Instead of having a speed controller, when it got to be so fast, the whole generator mechanism actually tipped up and kind of spilled the wind. You know, that was a little different. But these are great old machines. But it weighs a lot. You know, that is a big, heavy generator to get up on a tower. It's a spooky thing to do. But it'll be done. But that's why I say I got to get her all together before I go climbing that tower and sticking that thing up there again.